This is Rostra, the St. Theodore Guerin Junior Classical League podcast, where we bring the lessons of classical study into the light for the benefit of all.
So welcome back to another episode of Rostra. We've got Grace Zirkelbach with us here today, and as Grace and I were just talking just a moment ago before we started recording, I'm surprised that no one has talked about this topic before.
I'm surprised too.
Yeah, we're deep into season 2, and you are just now talking to us about this thing. So what is your topic, and why did you pick it?
I chose the Trojan War, and I chose it because I know we learned about this in first year Latin, and we started to talk about it a little bit in second year Latin already. And I was interested to learn more about the history that goes along with this war because I remember the mythology story that we talked about, but not as much as the historical details that go with it. And
I love the fact that you mentioned both aspects, because a lot of people know about the Trojan War from the stories of Homer, and you got the gods and goddesses, and people are like, okay, well, that's just a pure mythology story. It's not. There is history woven in with it. It's almost like historical fiction in a way. So maybe start off with that. What is historical about the Trojan War?
Well, it started because Paris, the Prince of Troy, eloped with Helen of Sparta, but she was already married to the Greek king.
Doesn't usually work well when a guy runs off with another man's wife, and especially when that other man is a king. So he's going to get revenge. He's going to get his wife back. No question about that. So you mentioned Menelaus of Sparta. He wants obviously to get his wife Helen back. What does he do to accomplish that?
He starts a war with Troy to get her back.
Starts a war with Troy, and you gotta be honest. Obviously, he loved his wife, right? I mean, you're going to go off and start an entire war. Gets his brother Agamemnon, who is a fellow king. Gets a bunch of other kings of Troy. Everybody gets their forces together. Off they sail, and there they go. Why is this such a popular story? I mean, let's be honest, there's been wars throughout human history. Not every war is the subject of poetry and movies and art and so forth. Why this one?
Because the war lasted 9 years all over a guy's wife, and because of the tactic the Greeks used at the very end.
Okay, so we'll get to that in just a moment. It was a long war, right? Lasted about a decade, and again, I think there is something just a kind of the romantic, almost fantasy notion of, hey, there's a war, but it's really ultimately over love, and it's over this woman, and so forth. So I think you're right. I think that's what draws people's attention. Now, you mentioned the tactics. So over this decade of fighting, neither side really gains the advantage. They're duking it out, and it's pretty much equal. Finally, in the 10th year of the war, new strategy. What is it?
The Greeks made a big wooden horse, and they put it outside of Troy's gates at night, and then the Trojans woke up and they saw it, and they took it in because they thought it was a present of their victory. And so there was a bunch of Greeks hiding in the horse, and then so the following night, when all the Trojans went to sleep, all the Greeks got out and started killing the Trojans.
Absolutely. Famous or infamous, depending on how you think about it, for thousands of years now. Everybody knows about the Trojan horse, right? Those Greeks hiding inside, Trojans take the horse inside. Couple things we need to talk about that. That phrase, Trojan horse, is popular today, especially in the realm of technology. Do you know what is a Trojan horse regarding technology?
Like a virus, so you'll install something and then it'll send out a bunch of mini viruses throughout your computer without you knowing.
Exactly. We're still using that strategy. In fact, we're still using that name, right? The Trojan horse, which I think is kind of amusing. Here we are in the 21st century, super high tech, all this kind of stuff, and we're still using that strategy and referring to it by that name. Do you know who tells the story of the Trojan horse? Did you come across that in your research?
I don't.
So a lot of this Trojan War stuff is told to us by the Greek poet Homer, right? So he wrote these two epic poems, the Iliad, which is really about the war itself, and then the Odyssey, which a lot of students know, is the one Greek hero, Odysseus, on his way home. He actually doesn't tell the story of the Trojan horse. It's the Roman poet Virgil who tells the story of the Trojan horse. Because Virgil, in his epic poem, the Aeneid, he tells the story kind of from the Trojan side of things, and has this Trojan hero named Aeneas who survives the war and rescues his family, and they flee from Troy. He's the one who tells the story in Book 2 of the Aeneid, and it's incredibly dramatic and all that. Now, a reference right there, just the poetry. Where has this story, the story of the Trojan War, popped up over time? Obviously, I mentioned Homer and his poems, and that's one of the issues about recording during the school day. You're going to get a bell from time to time. What else has been a way for people to tell this story, and what other formats has this come out?
Like movies.
Movies, yeah. And again, even in the modern age, I mean, it was, again, 21st century. We just had this big movie, Troy. Now, it's at this point, I think the movie itself maybe is close to 20 years old. But still, in terms of human history, I mean, that's very, very modern. And there have been other movies and stories about it. I've seen comic books or graphic novels about it. I think maybe even some video games that center around it. We just love that kind of stuff. Now, all of that is still, it's in the realm of fiction, all right? We don't know if the Trojan horse actually existed. There may not have been an actual Trojan horse. That may have been just Virgil's imagination. But there is historical evidence for the Trojan War itself. And I see you nodding. Did you encounter some of that in your research?
I saw just a little bit of it.
Yeah. So given where Troy is located, we've got evidence that there were actually multiple wars where people are sailing back and forth near the coast where Troy is, and wanted to take control of that land, all right, for the sake of trade and power and that sort of thing. So we know that there was a settlement in the area of Troy. We got the evidence that it was sacked, rebuilt, sacked again, rebuilt multiple times. And so probably what we call the Trojan War is probably just kind of a fictionalized account of all these wars and kind of bringing them together, into one story, which again makes for a terribly dramatic story. Now you mentioned about having connected with it in Latin class, that we'd read some of it. Where else have you connected with the Trojan War, just in your own reading or studies?
Well, definitely through like the movies and stuff.
Yeah.
Because I think we watched one about it, or that was a Gladiator.
There was Gladiator, but I think we may have, or if not, even this year we're going to see, because you're going to get back into the Trojan War again later this year, where we actually read a Latin version of the Greek Iliad. So it turns out that the Greek Iliad was translated into Latin several times. We're going to read parts of one of those versions, and we're going to see some scenes from the movie Troy. I think you guys read it. Don't you usually read some of the Odyssey over in your English class?
Just a little bit of it.
Exactly. And students have been doing that for generations as a common thing there. So hugely important in terms of the mythology and all that kind of stuff. Is there any particular connection did you run across between the Trojan War and Rome itself?
Like the goddesses.
You've got that. You've got the goddess Venus. It was her son Aeneas who escapes Troy, and then it's his descendants who ultimately build Rome. So Rome connects with the Trojan War. You've obviously got the Greeks. You've got so many cultures. And by the way, I mean, I don't know how much of a sports fan you are, but Trojan or Trojans, that's a fairly common sports mascot. University of Southern California for one, USC Trojans, but there's lots of high schools and other places that use the Trojans as their mascots. So we kind of see that all over the place. Such a fascinating topic. Anything else that you found in your research that you think, man, we just really got to get out on this show and we want people to know?
Well, I think the mythology story behind it too is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Anything else you want to say about that?
Well, there was a human named Aeneas that married the goddess Venus, and they were married. All the gods and goddesses were there, except for Eris, the goddess of chaos. So what she did was she tossed a golden apple into the wedding to be gifted to the most beautiful. And if you know anything about weddings, Mr. Perkins, you're not supposed to outshine the bride on her wedding day.
You're not supposed to outshine the bride on her wedding day. This is absolutely right. I am familiar with that, the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. And man, that's what starts the whole thing. And which goddess is the most beautiful? And you already mentioned Paris then. And so when this young man, Paris, Troy, gets called to judge this divine beauty contest, the goddesses bribe him, don't they?
Yeah. Hera promised to make him the ruler over all Europe and Asia.
Yep.
Athena promised to make him a great military leader and make him conquer all of Greece. And Aphrodite promised him that he would marry the most beautiful woman in the world.
And this is where you've got to read the fine print.
But she didn't specify if it would be married or unmarried.
That's exactly right. She didn't say the most beautiful single woman in the world. Just the most beautiful. Most beautiful happened to already be married. Mm-hmm. So that's why you got to read the fine print on these beauty contests, right?
Yeah.
So turned out to be absolute disasters. So, well, Grace, this is absolutely fantastic, and just you got some good stuff there. And honestly, there's so many ways for folks to get back into the story if they want to check it out themselves. Thank you. We'd love to have you back on the show.
Thank you for listening to Rostra. You may check out all our episodes on Spotify and follow us on social media at GuerinJCL. That's at GuerinJCL.